An Unexplanation and De-Analysis of Tintern Abbey by William Wordsworth, 1770 to 1850. Poem of the Week, number 43. First published on the 13th of October, 2023. This poem is perhaps a little too long to post in its entirety, so if anybody would like to read it together with other fine poems by Wordsworth, please follow the link in the description. I'm a bit cloven as to how, or even if, the reading of poetry, and high-quality poetry in particular, ought to be a part of school curricula. It probably is the most effective way of diffusing it en masse, yes, but when reducing its experience to a formulaic regurgitation for the purpose of attaining a grade, I can almost only feel revulsion, and of a particularly animated kind at that. I begin thus because the poem at hand, as great as any penned in the English language, must evidently be part of some state syllabus in India, judging by the thousands of pages and videos yielded from the subcontinent when searching Tintern Abbey plus analysis on the internet. And yet how their readings, though gleaning the superficial substance, miss its dimensions entirely. What's worse, they take what is living and palpable and all but strangle and sepulture it, rendering it into some kind of taxidermied cadaver. And I would almost be surprised, in all honesty, if there were any students at all with whom a poem like Tintern Abbey still resonated after such treatment. If the true qualitative experience of poetry has to thus be destroyed, one really must ask whether reading it in the first place is worth it at all. And in that way I suppose I count myself lucky to have not encountered this poem in a classroom, either at secondary school or university, lest it had thereby been tainted for me forever. For in the end the only way to read a poem is nakedly, coming to it as naively as a child, and without any goal in mind other than gleaning its author's intention, and delighting in the passion that he or she has poured into it. And if one, smitten by such passion, wishes to retransmit it to others through a personal analysis and explanation, that is all well and good. But when it becomes a means of scoring points on a test, or worse, promoting some bogus political ideology or cultural theory, one does more than miss the mark. One all but destroys it. And so if the words analysis and explanation have started to sour for any school-tired reader because they associate with them the things I have lamented against above, then as some kind of contrarians may we aim for a de-analysis or an un-explanation of the poem at hand. I think in any case that is what Wordsworth would have preferred. I still vividly remember the moment I first read Tintern Abbey, and reflecting on it now is almost like reminiscing on an episode of falling in love. It was cold and clear outside, and I was half lying on my bed, my upper back languidly pressed against a wall, and the first edition of lyrical ballads on my raised lap, in a manner that my senescent sinews would scarcely be capable of today. I had almost made my mind up that it was a rather mediocre collection of verse, until I got to the very last poem. And oh, the electrification. Quote, 5 years have passed, 5 summers with the length of 5 long winters, and again I hear these waters rolling from their mountain springs with a soft inland murmur. End quote. How can I analyze the quality of this? How can I break it down? There is nothing particularly interesting in the language, but how doesn't it soar? How pregnant is it not with meaning, as though uttered into existence by the tongue of a divine creator? This is a poem that is all soul, not a grandiose exhibition of its power, though, but a fine tracing of its beauty, and one so slight at times that it requires a particularly acute mind not to miss it. In this subtlety lies its grandeur, and it is one altogether freed from the schoolmaster's pedantry. Form. Blank verse. But how much doesn't this monologue, like all good blank verse, invite a dramatic variation? This is a poem that is anything but rigid, and it should certainly not be read as such. De-analysis and unexplanation. The full title sums up the poem in a very unpoetic fashion. Lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey on revisiting the banks of the Wye during a tour, July 13th, 1798. If there is any key word here, however, it would be revisiting, for this is broadly speaking a poem about memory. It was published when Wordsworth was 28 years old, and though still young, I suppose one could say that he had by that time experienced relatively much of the world. He had long since finished his studies at Cambridge, and had spent a significant amount of time touring Europe, particularly Italy, Switzerland, and France, in the last of which he fathered a child and became profoundly influenced by the ideological currents surrounding the French Revolution. In 1795, he had moved to Dorset in southern England with his sister, Dorothy, who also figures in the poem. There they both felt a longing back to their childhood lake district in the north, and this sets the scene for the poem at hand, as William and Dorothy return after a 5-year absence. Nothing in particular in the landscape has changed. Quote, "Once again do I behold these steep and lofty cliffs, that on a wild, secluded scene impress thoughts of more deep seclusion, and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. The day is come when I again repose here under this dark sycamore, and view these plots of cottage ground, these orchard tufts, which at this season, with their unripe fruits, are clad in one green hue, and lose themselves mid groves and copses." End quote. What has inevitably changed, however, is the poet, who goes on to describe how important the memories of these places have been as he has gone out into the world. They have been a kind of consolation in moments of despair. Quote, "These beauteous forms, through a long absence, have not been to me as is a landscape to a blind man's eye, but oft, in lonely rooms, and mid the din of towns and cities, I have owed to them, in hours of weariness, sensations sweet, felt in the blood and felt along the heart." End quote. And more importantly, they have unconsciously been as some kind of glimpse into something greater, a partial answer at least to an eternal longing and meaning beyond the mere temporal, the significance of which will perhaps only be fully revealed to us in death, when the soul is liberated from its body and returns to its source. Quote, "Nor less, I trust, to them I may have owed another gift, of aspect more sublime, that blessed mood, in which the burthen of the mystery, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened, that serene and blessed mood, in which the affections gently lead us on, until the breath of this corporeal frame, and even the motion of our human blood almost suspended, we are laid asleep in body, and become a living soul, while with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony, and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things." End quote. Remember how subtle I said this poem could be? The intimations of immortality, to cite the title of another Wordsworth poem, are always just glints and silent suggestions. Look at the choice of words in the passage above. The sublime is serene. It leads us gently, and its power of harmony is quiet. There is no Sturm, there is no Drang here. The great beginning of English Romanticism ironically enters with a meek step forward and a gentle sense of composure. Wordsworth could just as well have made this poem into a cliched wistfulness for childhood, but he avoids this, noting how even now, in this moment, the sensual impressions of what he sees are being imprinted in his mind for the future. Quote, "And now, with gleams of half-extinguished thought, with many recognitions dim and faint and somewhat of a sad perplexity, the picture of the mind revives again, while here I stand not only with a sense of present pleasure, but with pleasing thoughts that in this moment there is life and food for future years." End quote. He nonetheless holds a great reverence for childhood as a time in life when one is more in tune with the spiritual essence of the natural world. Although childhood memories remain, he admits that he cannot ever enter the child's mind again. Quote, "When like a roe I bounded o'er the mountains, by the sides of the deep rivers and the lonely streams wherever nature led, more like a man flying from something that he dreads than one who sought the thing he loved. For nature then, the coarser pleasures of my boyish days, and their glad animal movements all gone by, to me was all in all. I cannot paint what then I was. The sounding cataract haunted me like a passion. The tall rock, the mountain, the deep and gloomy wood, their colours and their forms were then to me an appetite, a feeling and a love that had no need of a remoter charm, by thought supplied, nor any interest unborrowed from the eye." End quote. Yet he avoids the other cliché of nostalgically idealizing the past, noting how he in posterity has had abundant recompense and has in some intellectual sense been able to tap into and in his poetry express the deeper meaning manifested in the natural world. Here, the orchestration of the verse launches into one of its finest crescendos. Quote, "That time is past, and all its aching joys are now no more, and all its dizzy raptures. Not for this faint eye, nor mourn, nor murmur. Other gifts have followed. For such loss I would believe abundant recompense. For I have learned to look on nature, not as in the hour of thoughtless youth, but hearing oftentimes the still, sad music of humanity, nor harsh, nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and subdue. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean, and the living air, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man, a motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things." End quote. Once again, look at how delicate it all is. Nature's music is sad and still, and its power chastens and subdues. Although he would in later life become a devout high church Anglican, judging both by the contents and the ingenuous power of the verse here, Wordsworth seems nothing short of a pantheist. Quote, "Therefore am I still a lover of the meadows and the woods and mountains, and of all that we behold from this green earth, of all the mighty world of eye and ear, both what they half create and what perceive, well pleased to recognize in nature and the language of the sense the anchor of my purest thoughts, the nurse, the guide, the guardian of my heart and soul, of all my moral being." End quote. In the final stanza, Wordsworth addresses his sister, who is also with him in this moment. Both she and the poet become some physical extension of memory, and there is a consolation that in their mutual presence they can and will be able to revisit what once was. Quote, "For thou art with me here upon the banks of this fair river, thou my dearest friend, my dear, dear friend, and in thy voice I catch the language of my former heart, and read my former pleasures in the shooting lights of thy wild eyes. Oh, yet a little while may I behold in thee what I was once, my dear, dear sister." End quote. And even if they will not be in each other's presence, they will nonetheless be able to revisit each other by thinking back on time spent together, moments like the very one they find themselves in now. Quote, "Nor perchance, if I should be where I no more can hear thy voice, nor catch from thy wild eyes these gleams of past existence, wilt thou then forget that on the banks of this delightful stream we stood together, and that I, so long a worshipper of nature, hither came unwearied in that service? Rather say, with warmer love, oh, with far deeper zeal of holier love, nor wilt thou then forget that after many wanderings, many years of absence, these steep woods and lofty cliffs, and this green pastoral landscape were to me more dear, both for themselves and for thy sake."